Wales today. Let's go now to our panel of politicians. Joining me this morning, the Labor MP Ed Husic and the Liberal MP Josh Frydenberg. Good morning to both of you. Josh Frydenberg, let's start with you.
Good morning,
that
Ash.
opinion piece by Peter Costello today. It is a distraction Mr Abbott doesn't need. He obviously is keen to keep the focus on the carbon tax, but this piece from Mr Costello puts the focus firmly back on industrial relations and what sort of changes the coalition might be wanting to make. Is the former Treasurer, reflecting a view that's widely held within the coalition?
Look, I think there's a widely held view within the coalition and within business as well that we do need IR reform. I've spoken about this in the Parliament too. We have falling productivity, we have wages blowouts, and small business is also finding the new unfair dismissal laws very, very difficult indeed. Tony Abbott's made it clear we'll take a policy to the next election on IR. It's his prerogative to rule something in or rule something out, but we are having a very robust internal discussion about those policy parameters that we'll take to the next election, but we will not allow the Labor Party to run a scare campaign about work choices or any other changes. This is about the business community speaking out about what is working and what is not. Tony Abbott saying that we will take a problem-solving policy to the next election. And let me just finally add, Ash, that even Wayne Swan has admitted that they will need changes to the Fair Work Act to make it work more smoothly.
But Josh Frydenberg, are you convinced by the sorts of arguments we've seen from the business community about individual workplace agreements? Are you persuaded by these arguments that they are needed to introduce more flexibility into the workplace?
Look, you know, there's a lot of arguments being made by the business community about lots of aspects of the IR reform. Tony Abbott's made it very clear.
Are you persuaded by those arguments?
No, I'm persuaded by what Tony Abbott has said, which is we're not looking at the individual workplace agreements. What we are looking at is a problem-solving policy to take to the next election. And we are listening to what the business community is saying, whether it's the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, whether it's the BCA, whether it's the Australian Industry Group, or whether it's business leaders like Michael Chaney, all of whom have been outspoken on the IR front. And, you know, let's face it, this government has a lot to answer for. It takes its lines from the union movement, it's re-regulated the workplace, and as a result, Australia is having a falling productivity rate.
Ed Husic, as Josh Frydenberg alluded to there, the government is reviewing the Fair Work laws. Is that an acknowledgement that perhaps changes are needed to introduce some of that flexibility back into the workforce?
Well, we'd said when the Fair Work Act went through the Parliament that we would at some point, once the changes had been bedded down, that we would look at the way that things would work, and that's a natural and normal way, and a sensible way, frankly, in which to look at, you know, any changes that you have made. I mean, I just think that the issue is particularly for the coalition, and the argument about individual contracts, which we've previously discussed on this program. You know, my deep reservations about individual contracts is it doesn't provide a mechanism for genuine two-way negotiation, because large businesses don't want to be tied up with the notion of negotiating one by one on individual contracts. So in effect, they become straitjacketed conditions, and that's the big issue that we have. So the Treasurer has said previously that we would look at aspects of the Fair Work Act, which is, you know, pretty much in line with what's been said. I do note, you know, that we've had Peter Costello and Peter Reith out there talking on this. I'm sure there are a lot of people in the coalition saying, "Send me more enemies because my friends are killing me." And I just, you know, I'm tired of previous, and this is on both sides of the fence, people who've been active in political life. I respect the fact that they've made a contribution, but at some point you'd wish that they would just let the current crop of people that are dealing with today's issues just, you know, get on and deal with them.
Ed Husic, the business community is also pushing for some pretty major tax changes. Next week, of course, this tax summit is going to be held in Canberra. The Australian Industry Group pushing for the government to relook at the GST, saying that it should be lifted, it should be broadened. Also saying that the mining tax needs a rework, saying that state royalties should be cancelled out as part of the MRT. Do you think that the government should be looking at these issues? How can any tax summit be taken seriously if those two major tax policy issues aren't addressed?
Well, everyone's going to get a chance next week to raise issues of concern or areas that they think that they want to revisit or look at or put forward alternative propositions.
The government's already said it's not open to those alternative propositions, so what's the point?
No, well, and some of that's not exactly true. I mean, there have been some, for example, that have been advocating with industry that we look at, for example, the treatment of losses, particularly as they affect small business. There are things that we've said that we are considering and open to considering, but there are some things, and frankly, me just as a backbencher, I have no interest whatsoever in seeing any changes to the GST because, frankly, I just don't see that slugging households to create business tax cuts is the way to go. But that's just my view as an individual MP. But there'll be people that will have the opportunity to put their case forward, and they'll get that opportunity next week. I think the forum's a great platform for people to put forward views about what should be done in the tax system.
Josh Frydenberg, the opposition has bagged this tax forum, but will your side still be participating in it? And what's your take on those pushes to lift the GST?
Look, I mean, I think the point is we do need fairer, simpler taxes, and it's not a tax summit, may I say, Ash, and, Ed's referred to it as a tax forum. I think it's more like a tax seminar. This is sort of cobbled together by the government at the last minute. It's on again, off again, and not everything is on the table. The fact is the Henry Tax Review spent months and months in looking at the whole tax system. They came up with 136 recommendations, and this government effectively took one out of that, which was a mining tax, which is a bad tax and which affected our sovereign risk. And it's also found that in Australia we have more than 135 taxes working across the levels of government. That's too many because only 10 of those taxes provides 90% of the revenue. So we do need simpler taxes. We need to have a root and branch review of the tax system. We need to be encouraging investment, encouraging companies to employ people. I mean, the payroll tax is a difficult one, I think, and needs to be looked at seriously. So I'm disappointed that the government is having this tax seminar and not a root and branch review of the tax system, because I think there is a good case there for more wide-scale reform. But we do know that this government is good at one thing when it comes to tax, and that's lifting it. They've put in 19 new taxes since coming to government, and there's going to introduce the daddy of them all, the carbon tax. So I don't really have any confidence whatsoever, Ash, in the Gillard government to reduce our tax burden on the taxpayer.
Okay, let's go to the stats. No, hang on. Just one thing. Let's just go to the stats.
Very quickly, Husic, I need to move on.
19 taxes. 19 taxes.
Tax take versus as a proportion of GST under our government versus your government. You guys had the biggest amount of tax that was grabbed as a share of GDP. So let's just get that straight.
No, that's
okay. Look, we're going to hear a lot more about this tax debate next week, so hold your fire until this summit next week. I'm sure that we'll be having that dominating the agenda, and we're looking forward to that happening here in Canberra. Do stay with us. After the break, we'll look at Julia Gillard's parents' plea for Australians to trust her daughter. That's next.